To kick us off today, we'll be hearing from Andrew Klein about his experiences as an MC in a virtual world. And although I know Andrew is very capable of talking to himself for the next 15 minutes, it's my great pleasure to welcome Kate Smith from Waldron Smith, joining us from Melbourne to interview Andrew today on your behalf. So welcome, Kate. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Chris. I'm delighted to be here. And thank you for putting together today. I'm sure we'll all learn a lot from the insights this morning. But it is my pleasure this morning to start a conversation with Andrew Klein, who's one of Australia's leading professional conference MCs, working on conferences around the Asia Pacific area, as well as the US and South Africa, back in the days when we could travel, of course. But since March, Andrew has now been working from his home office or in Sydney or in studios like you'll see today. I've had the pleasure of working with Andrew for a number of years, and he's one of the most engaging MCs out there. He comes well prepared, he's quick on his feet, has great humour, and importantly, he's able to adapt to audiences regardless of who he's facing. But like all of us, Andrew's been on a steep learning curve since his madness started in March and has now hosted a number and a wide variety of virtual conferences and online events. So he's now very comfortable, of course, to say he's virtually an MC. We'll have the chance to ask Andrew some questions, and please, if you'd like to share some of your questions, add those to the chat box. We've got a fairly limited time. Andrew and I are known to fill up some chat very easily, but we'll try and get through all of the questions this morning. So welcome to you, Andrew. Lovely to see you. You've been on the front line now for virtual events since COVID struck, and today we're really keen, obviously, to learn from that experience. Most of us, I think, in the audience have perhaps worked with MCs in the old world, but now we face a new world. Tell us, how different is it being MC in the virtual space and what your experience has been?
Thank you very much, Kate, and it is lovely to be here chatting with you. As you said, we could chat for hours, so let's try and get straight to it. Even though Chris did introduce me by saying that Andrew would be very comfortable speaking for 15 minutes on his own, it is nice to be actually conversing with you. Look, in answer to your question, how different is it? On the one hand, it is not very different because you are still trying to keep people's attention and anchor a conference, which is exactly what MCs, hosts, compares, whatever you want to call us, that's exactly what we were doing back in the good old days. Remember them, when we were actually live and face to face. Okay, so that part of it hasn't changed. What has changed, and I don't think it's any secret to anybody out there in events world, what's changed is that I'm sitting here on a chair in a room on my own, looking at a camera, rather than looking at a group, a large group usually, of people in chairs, in a room, in an auditorium, at a convention centre, in a hotel, and feeding off the buzz of all of that. Now that is a big, big change, and as you said, that's also a really steep learning curve. But the role, in my view, is not entirely different to what it was before. You're still, as an MC or as a compere, as a host. The reason I'm searching for those words is that I do think our role is a little bit different. So to say master of ceremonies, that's an old term anyway, and there's no ceremony anymore. You're usually in your room on your own. But let's just say anchor. Our role is to work the audience even though you can't see the audience and even though they can't talk to each other. The word or the description that I've heard used a lot in conference and event land that I really agree with is that we're not doing conferences. We're actually doing a version of a conference slash hybrid slash television show, live TV event. It's a lot more like that. And in a live TV event, it's my view, in fact, even in a pre-recorded TV event, you need to have somebody to pull it all together. You need to have an anchor, you need to have a host. So whether it's a show like The Project, or whether it's a news program or current affairs program, or the live New Year's Eve fireworks broadcast, you need to have a focal place and a focal person or persons to try, in any way they can, to keep people attentive, to keep them online, to keep them involved, to handle problems if they happen, and to keep people's attention. So that's my view. That's our world now.
And you touched on a few points there, which I think is interesting about that broadcast focus. You know, it's not a conference as we have been familiar with. It is a different space now. So if we're looking for an MC, is the skill set different, or is it heightened is there a better type of MC for this forum than perhaps a face-to-face room? Do we need to be more selective as to who we're looking to be that host?
Look, I have to be delicate in the way that I answer that, okay? I'm not here today, Kate, to promote Andrew Klein, okay? I'm here today to promote the idea of using someone, and ideally it should be a professional, because we should be using professionals in our industry for all parts of our virtual events, but to use someone who is comfortable and experienced in my view, two things. The first thing, comfortable and experienced in hosting an event. So that would be the usual people who are able to host conferences and events. And I know and you know that there are events and event organisers who have never really seen, or clients who haven't seen the benefit of investing in an MC. And I don't think I'm going to be able to convince those people. But to those of you who are comfortable using an MC or see the benefit of it, yeah, I really think that there is more value now than ever. And you want to basically find someone, an MC, who's comfortable doing the MCing, but is also comfortable with looking down a camera. And to be honest, and I think there are many MCs who are in my position. I've done a little bit of it before, but we're all learning. You're learning, I'm learning, we're all learning new skills. It is a different type of skill. It is a different level of comfort. But the most important thing, I think, is somebody who is comfortable on the fly. Somebody who's comfortable improvising, somebody who's comfortable filling the space and keeping the energy up and keeping the fun and the engagement up when, and I don't say if, I say when something wrong happens. And this is no criticism to all the incredible technical people involved today and in all the virtual events. We're also steep learning curve. I know some people had done a lot of it before, but a lot of people are learning. Things go wrong, and things can go wrong not because of the technical stuff that we've got here. It's because for the first time in conference land, we are now based in one location, but our speakers are often going to be located in a lot of different spaces where there aren't professionals. So we're going to be crossing live to the marketing manager, and the marketing manager is located at her house in, Nowra. Let's go live to her now. Let's rely on her internet, her webcam, all of those things. Things can and will go wrong. What happens when that happens? You want to have somebody on site who's anchoring it, who is comfortable. That's a long answer to your question. You want an MC who's comfortable with events and conferences, but somebody who is comfortable when things go wrong, because things go wrong in virtual conference land. You want to limit that likelihood by getting really good technical people involved, but you want to have a fallback position of what are we going to do? How are we going to keep people engaged? How are we going to manage the craziness that's going down when the person isn't actually where they're meant to be, or their webcam isn't working, or we can't hear them, or the sound and the vision is all skewed?
I think, Andrew, it brings up a good point, particularly from an audience experience perspective. So if something does go wrong technically, if you're sitting in your lounge room or at your kitchen bench watching, you don't know if it's just your world it's not operating in, or if it's across all of the world. I'm sorry, someone's just set the printer off in my background there. So there you go, the realities of it all. Someone sitting at the kitchen table doing that instead. So I think it's a comfort level too. Some of you may have been involved with the MIA Evolve Renovated conference last week, which went fabulously well. We were really proud of it, but we had a technical hitch too. And through no fault, it was just one of those things that did happen, as they happen on site as well. So it was a really good learning curve for us to know how quickly to respond to that and what your options are. And I think in planning for an online event, that now becomes one of the planning issues too, the contingencies. What do we do if something does go amiss, and how do we communicate? And as you've said, that anchor person to act and react to, and a bit of that troubleshooting certainly helps as well.
Absolutely. Kate, I just wanted to say on the topic of things going wrong, I know that conference organisers and technical people start having heart palpitations when things go wrong. But I'd say two things to that. First of all, we have audiences at the moment who get it, because we are all in this together. Your printer goes off, my dog at home will bark, and that's okay. I don't think we need to apologise. We just need to laugh, accept it, embrace it. We need to own the fact that we are at home. But the contingency plan issue, I reckon that has become more important now, Kate, than ever before. Normally, when we had people, and you and I have worked together many times with large audiences, if something goes wrong, we've got everybody there. Everyone knows that they are experiencing the same error at the same time. And it's pretty easy to jump up on stage as a host and say, look, ladies and gentlemen, you can clearly see that we're having some technical issues. The PowerPoint isn't working or whatever it is. Have a chat with the people next to you, talk about some of the key messages, introduce yourself to somebody behind you, or just jump on your mobile phones is what people really want to do, and just get on with things. We'll be back in 5 minutes. We don't need to panic about that. That's okay. Everyone knows. But now we need to have that contingency plan up our sleeves. And in my view, that's now the number one thing. I'll give you an example. I was doing an event actually that On Air were involved with, and the technical issue had nothing to do with from our end. It was that a person who was meant to be the next presenter, they had switched their webcam off, so we couldn't actually go to them. And the easiest thing to do, and it worked, was literally just to say, hey, we can't get Jane in yet, so in the meanwhile, can everyone jump on their chat line and let us know, what are you watching in isolation on Netflix? And the chat line just lit up. We had all of these shows. I, together with the person who was monitoring the chat line, Michael, we were able to chat through all of the shows that people were watching. We did that for about 3 or 4 minutes. Nobody panicked. It wasn't an issue. The audience were more engaged during that technical issue than ever before. And then the person appeared, webcam came on we went. No issue. But that was a contingency plan, the ability to actually have up our sleeves, what are we going to do if this happens? And they're the discussions that, from my perspective, as a host, as an anchor person, for want of a better term, they're the discussions that are happening now more than ever, and need to, because that will happen.
So, Andrew, from an organiser's perspective, do we need to brief you any differently? Do we need to prepare you any differently? Do we need to bring you in, and you, I mean MCs, that role in at any earlier time, later in the piece? What's the right fit, given what you've seen to date, and what kind of information is it vastly different to? And I'm sure there was degrees of preparation that different clients would go to, but in terms of what makes it work for an MC, from an organiser's perspective, what do we need to give you, and when do we need to give that to you to ensure that you're all prepared and ready for that experience?
Yeah, I reckon that part of the brief and part of the discussions in a virtual event, from our perspective, from the host's perspective, part of it is the same. So we need to have all the background on the event and the key players and the acronyms and who the sponsors are and what the timing is, all of that, all of that part is usual. Where things are a little bit different are that we now need to be much more across, not how the technology works, because I'm not a tech guy, but we need to be across things like what's going to happen if, and who's managing the chat line, and where's the chat line, and am I doing the chat line, is somebody else doing the chat line? How are we going to manage the timings, because timings become even more important now than they were beforehand. You can't have people...
The second, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't have people going for 5 minutes longer, because there are, as we know, many, many people who are going to move in and move out of the event. And so therefore they're going to be following the timeline and they're going to come in and not know what's going on. Whereas normally, if we're honest about it, in the old world, we held everyone hostage in a room for the time in which we were doing those sessions. Now, timing was still important then. Now it's more important. So the briefing, has to involve that timing. But I reckon it's the technical discussions. I've had, if I'm honest, much more rehearsal than I've ever had beforehand. Normally, for a conference, it would be you'd come in as the MC the day before or the night before. You'd go, you'd have a look at the setup, the backdrop, you'd work out the microphones, you'd do a sound check, you'd work out the moving pieces. But that was about all. There was not a lot of discussion about what do we do if something goes wrong, because it's sort of, after experience, you sort of learn what you have to do. Now, there needs to be discussions between your host, your technical people, and your conference organising, your event organiser people. What are we going to do in these circumstances? How are we going to know if it's just our feed, or how are we going to know if it's the audience's feed, or if it's the presenter's feed? And what do we do? So a little bit, I'm not necessarily that we need to come in earlier, but I think there needs to be more discussion, rehearsal, tech setup than probably ever before for a live event. That's the extra bit. But all the other preparation, I'd say that's pretty much, it's the same amount of work, same amount of pre-work.
Yeah. And you've had a good question come through, an MC tip on how you keep an audience engaged. And obviously the length of the conference can vary. We've been on ones that have been an hour, we've been, Evolve, for example, was a full day. From an MC's role, and you talked about that energy and keeping people engaged, what are the things, or what tips do you have as to how we do that, depending on the length and duration of the actual event?
Well, in order to answer that, I've got to say a quick word about the length and duration of the event. I know, as do you, as does everybody watching this, that we are all learning what's working as we go. Here's my view, and Kate, you and I have chatted about this offline as well, and I've chatted with a number of people who are watching today. It's my view now more than ever, as somebody who works in the area of audience engagement, short is better. I reckon that was the case even when we were live. Short, sharp conferences, short, sharp sessions, they work better. We've got to keep people attentive and involved. Now, in my view, the best feedback, the feedback that I would say all events people want to receive from a virtual event, this is what we want to aim for in our industry, in my personal view. We want the feedback from the audience to be, really good event, I wished it was longer. Your event was too short, should have been longer. Until we're getting that feedback from our virtual audience, in my view, we should be having the shortest events that we can in order to fulfill the brief. Okay, now sometimes the brief is that we've got a huge amount of information to deliver. Sometimes the brief is we've got to give our clients the opportunity to get their continuing education points, their CPD points, their professional development points. And so that sometimes means that we can't have things as short as we can. But if we take the TV idea that we started with, think of how TV shows work. They're short, they're sharp, there's cuts, there's different segments, there's ads, there's different people, there's interviews, there's live presentations, there's sponsor presentations, let's call them ads. That, as an MC, I reckon you should be encouraging, it's my view, we should all be encouraging our clients to think about that. Why are we doing it for 3 days? Should we do it for 3 hours? Can we do it in 1 hour? If it's 1 hour, can we do it in less time? If that presentation is normally 45 minutes, can we not get the key messages down to, 6 minutes? Is that possible? Because that is what is going to engage people the most. Someone like an MC can help in that we are just trying to, if I'm really, really honest, my brief in a lot of conferences in years gone by is just do whatever you can to keep people engaged, because we've got a lot of presentations and some of them are not professional presenters, so they're not that exciting. We've got to keep them engaged. So you want energy. You want somebody who has got a little bit of humour, an opportunity to have a little bit of fun. And another tip that I would have, hopefully there were a few more in
Please.
there, is try and do things where you can in interview format. Now, not all the time, but I could have spoken, as you can see, I can talk for hours. It's more engaging when people are watching a conversation. US talk shows are doing it brilliantly. Don't just have somebody delivering information, make it conversational. And second tip, chat line,
Quick
Q&A. Get people involved, do anything that we can to try not to simulate what we were doing live, because it's not taking a live conference and putting it online. That is not what we're doing. Try and do whatever we can creatively, and we're all learning and brainstorming and thinking to make it as interactive as we can and short and sharp as possible, unless you've got
Andrew,
rockstar presenters. Yes, stop me.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there, and it's been fantastic. We've got some questions there that we will get the answers to and share back through, I know.
Brilliant.
I think your point is really valid there. It's not putting the familiar conference on. It's a completely different beast. And I think when we get to hybrid, we're going to have a whole other discussion again as to how you combine. But thank you this morning for sharing your experiences. I know it's helped me personally, but I'm sure a lot of people out there even considering what the possibilities are. So thank you, Andrew. Great to see you. And for everyone else, thank you for joining us. And if you make your way to the foyer, the next session will soon be with you starting soon.
Good to chat,
Thank you.
Kate.